This woman lived at a blind millionaire's home for years to nurse and provide for his every need. They grew very close, but the woman didn't know the terrible truth that was hiding right beneath her very nose. Because when the millionaire revealed his identity, she immediately had to call the police. Woman nurses blind millionaire for years, calls police when he reveals his identity. Emma's life as a private nurse was great. She was tasked to nurse a blind millionaire named Henry, and to be able to provide 24/7 care, she lived with him in his mansion. Over the years, they grew a strong bond. All of that made her love her job, but that was about to change. Because all of a sudden Henry's behavior changed drastically. Emma didn't understand why or what had caused it. She had been nursing Henry for years and knew him incredibly well because of it. She saw him more like a friend than a patient or boss. But with this sudden behavior change, everything changed. Over the years, their relationship had grown, and they started doing things together. Slowly but surely, they created a routine in their day, and they would enjoy tea together or take a stroll around the estate. It was almost like they were one person, but Henry suddenly didn't want anything to do with Emma. The blind millionaire seemed very interested in his own privacy. He told Emma to cancel all appointments from the calendar as he didn't want any company this month. Which was weird, as Emma knew him as a very social person who loved having people around. It was all very unlike him. Instead of being his cheerful self, Henry locked himself into his study for hours without calling for help or needing any assistance, which he usually required constantly. When Emma came to check up on him, he would get angry and say he wanted to be alone. What had gotten into him? Even though Emma was a nurse and that job usually came with nerves and worry, she had never had to worry about Henry. He was always joyful and cheerful and asked her if he needed anything. But now things were different. Emma interpreted these changes as signs something was wrong and started to worry. If he wasn't inside the study, he would lock it, which he had never done before. Emma started looking for signs of depression or sickness but couldn't see anything. Then, one day, during cleaning, she found the study unlocked. She decided to take a look, which she usually wouldn't do, but her worry took over. The moment Emma entered the study, her eyes grew wide. The room was littered with documents, folders, and binders. "What happened here?" she mumbled as she walked toward the desk. Emma picked up the first document she could and saw it was a bank statement. Immediately, a worrying thought crossed her mind. Normally, she would always read these financial notes to him, but the fact that he kept this room locked and sent her away every time meant something was off. Was Henry in financial trouble, and did he want to hide it? But the truth would turn out to be much darker than she thought. But before Emma could inspect more of the documents and try to figure out what was going on with her old friend, Henry surprised her. The millionaire was standing in the doorway, furious that his nurse was snooping around in his study. "Get out," he yelled at her. Emma left obediently but with doubt. As she walked away, she glanced back and saw Henry lock his study's door. Her vision blurred. He had never yelled at her before. She didn't know how to deal with his new behavior. She felt a mixture of astonishment, hurt, and worry. "He must be in serious trouble," she mumbled. He had to be. When the nurse recovered from Henry's tirade, she devised a plan. She would pay close attention to everything he did in the following days. That way, I may get some idea what he got mixed up in, she thought determinedly. But her plan backfired. The more attention she paid, the more worried she became. Because one day some sketchy people came to visit Henry. Emma was surprised, as the millionaire had instructed her to clear his calendar, and he would generally give her a heads up. But not this time. No, it seemed he wanted to hide their visit as they parked behind the house and talked somewhere private. Hoping the surprise visit would give her an indication of what her friend's troubles were, Emma decided to spy on the group. Henry had guided them to a secluded part of the garden to talk privately. However, the nurse could still see them from a distance and noticed the people handing something to Henry. The sight made Emma even more curious and worried. "What could that be?" she mumbled. The group of people definitely looked shady, with their long coats and hats. "What did you get yourself into, Henry?" she whispered under her breath. Emma couldn't ignore it any longer and decided to confront him. When that moment arrived, Emma felt hesitant. This was something she had never done before. She took a deep breath and mustered her courage. "Who were those people?" she asked. Henry turned his head in surprise, but didn't answer. "They're just friends," he said eventually, trying to brush it off. Emma knew he was lying and didn't buy it for 1 second, but it was clear that he didn't want to talk about it, and she didn't push any further out of respect for her friend. But it was clear something was seriously wrong. Did he want to protect her by keeping her away? That thought scared her, as she thought he would know better and that he could trust her. So, Emma kept providing for him, still keeping a close eye. But like the last week, he kept mainly to himself. And then, one night, as she was getting ready for bed, she suddenly heard him. Emma could hear him pace around in his bedroom. She noticed him do that a lot more recently, but she could also hear his voice this time. He was probably talking on the phone, and although his voice was muffled and she couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, she could hear his tone, stressed. Emma felt troubled and powerless. It hurt her that her friend was in so much trouble and he didn't want her help. While she lay in bed thinking about the situation, Henry's pacing and voice stopped, and she slowly started to fall asleep. But right before she closed her eyes, Emma noticed something. A light shone through the crack under her bedroom door. Her body instantly tensed as this was very unusual. Had Henry turned on the light? He never did that since he couldn't see anyway. Was there someone else in the house? Emma sat up in her bed and pricked her ears. Her fast breathing and the pounding of her heart made it hard to listen, but Emma thought she could hear someone moving around in the house. As quickly and silently as possible, she put on some clothes and opened her door. She needed to know if there was an intruder in the house. Emma blinked a few times so that her eyes could adjust to the sudden light. Someone had turned on the lamp in the hallway, which partially lit the loft she was on. While holding her breath, she crept toward the stairs as the sound came from below. Then, her heart skipped a beat. There was a man downstairs, but it wasn't an intruder. Emma let out a sigh of relief as she saw Henry standing beside a cabinet in the hallway. There was no sign of anyone else. She was about to come out and ask if he was okay when something peculiar happened. Without any indication, Henry suddenly walked through the hallway with great speed. Emma was surprised by the action and stared at him in disbelief. He was walking without his cane, and even though he could move around his home without it, she had never seen him do it this fast. Then, Henry suddenly halted beside another cabinet and opened and closed its many drawers. He was clearly searching for something, but he always asked Emma when he lost something. She looked at it in wonder. He was searching at such speed it looked like he could actually see what he was doing. Emma stayed back on the loft, staring at the sight below her. Her mind was racing. She had never seen him do things this fast. It was impossible with his blindness. Did he play his blindness all these years? Was it just an act? What was going on? It felt like she was going crazy. She took a deep breath to calm herself and shook her head. It was clear she needed some rest. Emma silently returned to her room and tried to sleep, but her mind kept spinning and her worries increased. She couldn't handle it anymore. She had to know what was going on. The next day, Emma got up with newfound determination. She would find out what was going on one way or another. No matter how hard Henry would try to shake her off or send her away, she would stay close and pay close attention. But her plan would be very different than expected. As expected, Henry protected his privacy very hard. So, Emma prepared some tea to give herself a reason to visit his study. But as she arrived, Emma noticed the door was slightly open. She peeked through it and saw the old man staring into the mirror without his glasses. Then, her body froze. Fear took over her body in an instant, and Emma barely managed to keep the tray in her hands. Those weren't Henry's white glazed eyes. The man inside the study had dark brown eyes. Emma started to panic as everything fell into place. Henry wasn't behaving weirdly at all. This wasn't Henry. But who was it? This was far worse than she could have imagined. Where was Henry? Emma's mind was racing, and she was angry at herself. How couldn't she have noticed this sooner? But there was no time to be angry as she realized she had to play it cool, otherwise the imposter would notice, and things would worsen. Emma entered the study room to give the mystery man his tea. She was delighted he sent her away quickly and sighed after leaving the room. He wasn't on to her. Meanwhile, her mind was racing. She had to find out who this was, why he was here, and where Henry was. The man's value for privacy helped Emma this time, as she could think of the perfect plan in peace. That night, she went up to the attic above Henry's bedroom. There was a hole in the floor which enabled her to see and listen to what was going on below. Her plan was based on the fact that the man frequently called at night. So she prayed the man would continue his behavior, hoping she could figure out what was going on. And her prayers had been heard. Because late at night, the man started calling, and Emma listened breathlessly. Emma moved closer to the hole as silently as possible. She wanted to catch as much as possible to discover what was happening. It sounded like he was talking to his accomplices, and Emma immediately pictured the men in the long coats and hats. "Just a few days, and then it's done," the man said. Emma's heart pounded, and her mind raced. What would be done in a few days? But the man suddenly raised his voice in anger. "You only have to make sure he stays put." "I need to pretend I'm a blind old man," he said. That comment confirmed Emma's worst nightmare. Henry had been kidnapped. She had heard enough. Silently, Emma crawled away from the hole and left the attic. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was racing as she made her way to her room. All she could think about was where her beloved friend was and if he was okay. She had to do something. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone. Now that she knew what was happening, she could call the police. They would surely get to the bottom of this, she convinced herself. "My boss has been kidnapped," Emma said to the phone operator in a low voice, anxious to get caught by the mysterious man. Emma quickly explained the situation, and the operator told her not to worry and that the police were on their way. But that was precisely what Emma was. She was worried for Henry. He had been gone for a few weeks. Who knows where he was or how he was doing? But before she knew it, the police arrived. They didn't bother to knock on the door and entered the house with force. When Emma heard them overwhelm the imposter and take him into custody. When it was safe, Emma came out of her room and rode with the group to the station. At the station, the mystery man was taken into an interrogation room, but it didn't matter what the police tried, the man's lips remained sealed. Emma watched in frustration as she knew what the man was thinking. He could make a deal with the leverage he had, Henry. How were they going to solve this? The police and Emma racked their brains over the problem. They had the man in custody, but there wasn't any solid evidence, as they only had Emma's testimony that it wasn't Henry. There had to be something to help them. And then, their thought process was interrupted by a cell phone. It turned out to be the cell phone they took from the mystery man. Emma watched as the officers quickly set up a device to trace the phone call. Then, one officer took the call and managed to stall long enough for the trace to get through. They had an address. As quickly as possible, the police gathered a unit to go to the address. Emma was invited along to care for Henry if he was at the location. The nurse's heart pounded in her chest as the police cars rushed through the streets. "Let him be okay," she whispered under her breath. The car stopped, and the cold night air relieved Emma of all her tension and stress when she exited. She watched the police officers raid the address, and within moments, they reappeared with the mystery man's accomplices. An officer signaled it was safe for her to enter, and her heart jumped as she saw Henry. He looked thinner than before, but said he would survive. The reunited duo embraced each other for a long time, but Emma didn't know what to say. Together, they returned to the station where the police had already started a case against the criminals. But Henry's testimony would be crucial to its success. The blind millionaire explained the criminals had prepared very well. One would take his place, while the other would ensure he couldn't notify the police or Emma. The imposter would take over Henry's life and get access to his financial information to steal millions. But luckily, they got busted in time. The criminals were put behind bars thanks to Henry's and Emma's testimony, and the duo could return home safely. Emma felt very sorry and asked Henry for forgiveness, but the old millionaire was thankful for her courageous action and said there was nothing to forgive, and the two of them returned to their happy life.